The alien processional arrived like a moving cathedral of light, 12 hulls gliding into high orbit with the ceremony of a coronation parade. Commander Maya Rios watched from the bridge of EUS Common Cause as the first wave of human ships clicked into a lattice around the visitors. The lattice looked like Audacity made visible. Identical gray hulls with hazard yellow ribs, modular as shipping containers, arranged in spirals that stations would mistake for sculpture. "Hold fire locks cold," Maya said, voice crisp. "Escort geometry only." On her tactical, counters climbed as more units rose from low orbit, yard-built corvettes, tug guns with swap-in radiator wings, ambulance skiffs wearing red chevrons. The aliens had expected to collect a single envoy. Earth had shown up with a neighborhood. A silver-blue sigil shimmered on the holo. Processional of 3 suns, speaking for the Concord of 12. We request transfer of your representative for emergency session. Timetable, 72 Concord hours. Maya cut a look to Ambassador Noah Hale, strapped into a jump couch and pale with the gravity of it all. "We can't do interstellar," he said softly. She keyed the transmit. "Common cause to processional. Acknowledged. We lack starflight. Request. Convene preliminary here under safe harbor rules. We'll escort and provide humanitarian lanes. We apologize for 2 centuries of missed calls." Silence stretched, the kind with teeth. On ops, Lieutenant Ben Yazzie flicked glances between windows. "They're scanning our hull signatures, counting, and confused. Their sideband chatter calls our ships unnatural in uniformity." Maya ground a smile. "We used to build airplanes like this. Assembly lines. It didn't make the pilots love them less." Earth's trick wasn't technology, it was process. A distributed chain of foundries had rewoken in a day. Containerized fabs on piers in Gdansk and Lagos, undersea printers off Cebu, a desert yard outside Window Rock where elders blessed the first hull with cedar smoke and laughter. Doctors and machinists bunked side by side. A carpenter from Baton Rouge learned to torque coolant couplers while a coder from Pune memorized vacuum suit steps. Found family, bolted together at speed. "Transmit the harbor standard," Maya said. "Our rules of protection for non-combatants. Put it in their legal dialect." Hale's eyebrows ticked up. "We have one of those already." "We wrote it yesterday," Maya replied, "modeled on maritime law and every hard lesson we could remember. Dunkirk as logistics, not romance. Midway as timing, not glory. Civil defense boiled to verbs, move, shield, feed, tell the truth." A new alert flashed, orbit darkened at its edges. The sky wasn't blue up here, but the idea of sky dimmed anyway. Yazzie's lips thinned. "Ma'am, we have arrivals on far side vectors, heavier tonnage. Transponders read mandate enforcer wing." Maya breathed out slowly. The Concorde's diplomats had brought a choir. Their police had brought a drumline. "Any lock warnings?" "None yet, but their formation is tight." Hale squeezed his harness hard enough to whiten his knuckles. "If they think our silence meant war, we show a better meaning," Maya said. "No targeting. Broadcast med corridors, evac waypoints, food stocks. Put our intentions on every frequency they use and 3 they don't." The processional answered at last. "Preliminary accepted. However, per statute, an enforcer wing will assume proximate security. Human fleet is instructed to reduce presence to 10 escort hulls." Maya studied the tactical. 10 would be surrendering narrative control. 10 would look like obedience, not cooperation. 10 would leave refugees, if any arrived, with no hands to catch them. She dropped her voice for the command net. We'll honor the statute and keep our spine. Reconfigure from rings to threads. 1,000 ships strand spacing 3 kilometers, no hard locks. Looks like art, maneuvers like a net. Threads began to drift and weave, a loom of ships around the alien choir. The mandate wing paused, then spread to mirror. Someone aboard them knew geometry and pride. Yazzie swallowed. Ma'am, new contact set. Edge of the lunar exclusion, not Concord. Rough hulls, hot drives. They're herding cargo. On the magnification, the cargo resolved into barges with Civi Life signatures. Families in tin cans, panicked heat blossoms of overcrowded air. Ahead of them, sleet-bright missiles glittered. Hale whispered, "If we place ourselves between." "We do," Maya said. Her voice was flat as law. "We didn't build 1,000 ships to look dangerous. We built 1,000 to be useful." She pointed, and the threads bent toward the refugees like a tidal turn. Behind the processional, enforcer vectors sharpened to warning spears. The first Raider missile lit its engine. Maya said, "All units spin up curtain protocol, and nobody shoots first." The universe held its breath. Then the curtain unfurled. It looked like snow in space. Foamed aluminum blooms, glitter-fine ceramic chaff, micro-tethers that ballooned into nets once sunlight kissed their polymers awake. Tug guns laid the curtain with the muscle memory of longshoremen slinging line. Raiders, whoever they were, met the unexpected soft with panic hard. 3 missiles blossomed early, shock waves diffusing into the confetti of human improvisation. "Track the fragments, tag danger cones," Meyer ordered. "No hero runs." The refugee barges tumbled past the first thread, their hulls scarred, their radiators buckled like folded fans. EUS Common Cause rolled to show a red cross and opened her bays. Medskiffs kicked free. On the main screen, a raider captain spined with a neck crest that flared like anger made flesh, broadcast on an open band. "The free glass take what we must. You are between us and our tax. Move." Ambassador Hale toggled to push to talk. "By harbor law, non-combatants pass. Engage us if you must, but you will not take families." The mandate enforcer wing chimed in, voice so crisp it could cut rope. "All parties stand down. Human vessels, you exceed session limits. Free glass units submit to arrest." On Earth, in a yard under the Pacific, Dr. Priya Naring walked the catwalk above line Gamma, hand on rail as if she could steady the whole planet with a palm. "Feed bins?" she asked. "Full," said James Park, his voice hoarse. "Steel and copper from the ring smelters. Astronickel inbound from Ceres. We can hold 8 hulls an hour until the bearings scream." "Let them scream," Priya said, and then softer. "But with lubrication and rest, please. People too, not just ball races." Line Gamma's robot wrists never flinched. Human wrists trembled and laughed and drank broth in paper cups while they waited for Prince to cool. A kid from Veracruz who had never seen snow in person learned the cryosalt procedure that made radiator veins sing with cold. An auntie from Chennai, sari folded into coveralls, ran the calibration jig for coil guns like she'd been born to measure instead of spices. Back in orbit, Layla Haddad on comms glanced at Maya. "We're getting direct hail from the processional side channel, not the enforcers." "Take it," Maya said. The diplomatic voice carried a tired kindness. "Commander Rios, this standoff is young. Your curtain tactic is novel. The enforcer mandate prioritizes order. Your priority is different." "Protection first," Maya said. "Then order, in that order. In the Concorde chamber a light year away, archivist Corin blinked all 6 lids as he watched the relay feed. Human hulls moved like schooling fish, each identical, each ready to become the other if loss came. His people carved ships with family patterns and chosen imperfections. To fly another's hull was to lose a piece of oneself. Corin felt fear and a pulled thread of respect. The free glass fired again, this time in patterns meant to saturate. The curtain flexed. On Maya's command, threads tightened to create alleys, lanes that bent incoming darts toward empty sky. A dozen needles slipped through anyway. Target radiators only, Maya said. Disable, don't kill, proportionality. Just war theory reduced to a checklist that still had a soul. Right intention, discrimination, proportionality, reasonable chance. If philosophy couldn't live in a fire control menu, it wasn't worth memorizing. Rail needles flicked from 30 hulls, not as a volley but as a rhythm, a drummer's ghost notes instead of a marching band. Radiators bloomed steam like torn silk. Raiders lost Delta V, their hot tempers meeting the cold math of momentum. An enforcer cutter tried to wedge between a thread and a barge, alarmed by human proximity. Its pilot misjudged the human ship's drift flyer slop. A glancing scrape, a spin, and the cutter's lateral jets failed in a shower of blue sparks. Catch them, Maya said. A skiff with a Dene crew chief named Tajii flared thrusters and bumped the cutter into a stable tumble, then laced a tether. We've got you, Tajii said on open band, and the alien pilot, 6 fingers, gray skin, more pride than plasma, went very quiet. Ambassador Hale's screen filled with Concorde sigils, the politics descending like snow. Human delegation, a new voice said. You have violated enforcer primacy by interposing. Sanction motion cued. Hale stood within the camera frame, tie askew, eyes clear. We interposed between weapons and children. We will accept the consequences. Sir, Layla whispered off mic, there's a middle path. Offer joint custody of the moment. Hale nodded. We request immediate tri-party command for this contact. Enforcer, processional, and harbor. We'll document every action openly. We will cease all unilateral moves the instant a life corridor is confirmed. The raider captain cut across with a sneer. You make law as fast as you make ships. Faster, Maya said without smiling. Law is lighter. The processional's side channel returned. Tri-party accepted for emergency interval, the kind voice said with a quiet undertow of surprise. Make your corridor, harbor. Threads 3 through 7, Maya said. Open hands, everyone sees everything. 1,000 ships breathed outward. The barges slipped their terror into the space humans had made, and at the edge of radar, something big turned an ear toward the noise and began to listen. The free glass were not fools. They had survived by reading the fog of war for shapes and appetites. The shape they saw now, a loom of identical hulls turning chaos into lanes, was new. They tried to feign retreat, then whip back to snap a barge in the confusion. The enforcer wing, bound by primacy and statute, began to array for interdiction that would force a broadside across the human threads. Don't let our lanes become their kill box, Maya said, weaving pattern delta. Yazzie, mesh up on whisper bands. He hesitated. Ma'am, the Concorde doesn't like encrypted sidecoms outside their standards. That's why we use something they don't know to look for, Maya said. Language as armor. Ben Yazzie's grandparents had told stories of their grandparents. Dene Marines who spoke a code no machine could brute force because its assumptions were wrong from the first syllable. He pinged a dozen crews who'd volunteered dictionaries and family time. Across the grid, voice links lit with Lakota, Dene, Tagalog, Yoruba hissing between ships like kettle steam. Clipped phrases rode tiny lasers and tight beams, the kind of analog that survives when smart systems bite their tongues. Chitty left, one channel sang, weave like corn. The curtain shifted again, not random, not rigid, human. A Raider missile that had expected straight-line logic found itself wooed by decoys that flashed heat, then went cold like a lover rethinking a text. It chased and died tired. Maya watched the risk board. "We still need to meet their eyes," she said. "Show restraint where it costs. It has to cost." They aimed for radiators, thruster gimbals, sensor masts. They aimed away from crew modules, even when the math said a clean kill would be cleaner. An enforcer cutter stitched to the human skiff by Tajiai's tether fired grapples into a Raider hull. The Raider spun and shed plating like a snake in mid-molt. "Med priority," Layla said, voice tight. "Barge 9 has CO2 scrubbers fouled. They're minutes from panic." "Take her into our shadow," Maya said. "Give our air." Common Cause rolled again, opening a bay like a mouth between teeth. Refugees tumbled through in suits too big, in blankets that had been blankets an hour ago and now were flags of surrender to oxygen. Omar Reyes, med tech with hands that shook only after, slapped filters into place with a habit learned in hurricane shelters and field clinics. A six-fingered enforcer pilot staggered in after them, helmet under arm, eyes wide as a planet. "You saved us," she said, certain it sounded weak. Omar grinned without letting the grin break sterile protocol. "We save whoever fits in the door." Outside, the free glass realized they were losing face. Their leader snarled into the comets and ordered a rush. They stacked 10 darts nose to nose and burned hard for the center of a thread. "Let them think they'll pierce," Maya murmured. "Then give them a choice they don't like." The thread parted like a curtain in a house where generosity had rules. On the other side of the parting lay a swarm of boxes the size of microwaves. Raiders laughed, until the boxes popped lids and launched smart foam that clamped to drives and burned cold, stealing heat like a miser skimming coins. Drives sputtered. Raiders drifted. Human tugs nudged them into pens as gently as cattle hands who love their herd. On the Concorde relay, speeches sharpened. Human commander, a tall enforcer with armor like law, said, "You have exceeded necessity. You have humiliated felons." "Justice without dignity breeds more felons," Maya said. "We gave them a pen, not a grave." Archivist Corin's voice slipped into the chorus, hesitant. "Your formations remind me of something old, when our rivers froze and we fished through holes and shared lines across the ice. It is not art as we count it, but it is craft. Hale sees the opening, craft we can share. The sanction motion refused to die. Old powers do not enjoy new geometry. The mandate tally climbed. Hale prepped for a loss. "If they sanction," he said to Maya quietly, "we build anyway and feed anyway, but we will be alone." Maya nodded once. She had chosen long before to pay the cost. "We'll be alone until someone needs what we can do." On the board, a 3-beat ping rose from the dark between Mars and home. It wasn't free glass. It wasn't Concorde. It was patient and very large. Ben Yazzie looked up, uncharacteristically pale. "Ma'am, we've got a third listener, not moving, not answering, just counting." "Let it count," Maya said. "We have a corridor to finish." The Concord of 12 convened in a ring of light that wrapped a dwarf star a dozen stops away by relay. Ambassador Hale's face flickered into the chamber, the lag trimmed by an alien trick he could admire without understanding. "We missed your calls," he began, "because fear made our systems conservative. That is not an excuse. It's a diagnosis." He talked like a civics teacher who had been handed a planet for extra credit. He talked about the Dunkirk flotilla, not the heroism but the plumbing. Civilians, lists, routes, kettles of stew and ropes on cleats. He talked about Midway, not the explosions but the code books, the coffee, the guess that AF meant fresh water problem, and turned out to be Midway needs water. He talked about the civil rights movement's quiet magicians, the church ladies who turned Sunday basements into supply chains that could outlast nightsticks. "War," Hale said, "is not always the point. Sometimes the point is the infrastructure that stops war by making cruelty inefficient." Admiral Sarvech of the Mandate bristled. "Efficiency in killing is still killing." Maya's feed cut in before Hale could respond. "Efficiency in protecting is still protecting. Choose which to optimize." Dr. Priya Narang appeared with grease on her cheek and fatigue in the set of her jaw. "We'll open our process books," she said. "Oversight, audits, caps. No member buys more than 20% of our output. We pair every yard with your artisans so our ships aren't just cheap, they are understood." Corin murmured, "An open forge." "Open forge accord," Hale said, hearing the title land. "We gift the framework, modularity, maintenance at sea, at space, repair by amateurs made expert with design that forgives." The Concord hummed. Some tasted opportunity and licked their lips. Some smelled the end of the old ways and reached for weapons they called tradition. Then the lights in the ring flickered. Voices dropped an octave as the chorus, a logic virus long banned for its habit of turning policy into unanimity at gunpoint, slid through shared protocols like oil through silk. Status panels became hymns. Voting slates pre-selected themselves. Layla's console went black. "We're being harmonized," she said, voice brittle. Cut to analog, Maya snapped. "Line-of-sight lasers, hand rulers, if you have to, use flags." "Flags," Ben said, half laughing. "In a vacuum." "Flash panels," Maya said. "We built the bays with them for EVA drill. Time to be quaint." Across the threads, sailors unfurled mirror-bright panels and pulsed heliographs like lighthouse keepers in a storm. On a dozen ships, grandmothers took radios in hand and spoke in tongues machines didn't have libraries for. A Chukchi bosun sang weather into bearing. A Yoruba electrician counted beats that meant hold and release and brace. Language wasn't a lock. It was a refusal to be simplified. The Concord's own immune system stirred. Archivist Corin had not forgotten old plagues. He pulled memory from a dusty shelf, a quarantine protocol from a century when binary water had made ships sick, and boxed the chorus like a cat grips a snake, careful, amused, ruthless. Lights steadied. Hale exhaled. Voting resumes, without music. The open forge motion rose and dipped, as if it could forget gravity. On Common Cause, Omar Reyes pressed a stethoscope to a chest that had too many valves for his human map. "Breathe," he said, demonstrating with his own lungs like it was an ancient trick, and it was. The Enforcer pilot breathed. Outside the bay, children who had been refugees 2 hours ago tried to catch crumbs of sunlight with bare hands against the viewing port. A machinist from Gdansk showed them how to make shadow birds. Ben's whisper band piped a new tone into Maya's ear. "Confirming third listener, ma'am. Gravitic lens says it's not a ship. It's a field, a tide, and it brings company. Names, Maya said. Nothing official, Ben answered. The enforcers call it the Hemlock Continuum. Eat systems by convincing them to be one thing only. Maya's eyes went to the threads, their deliberate sameness made nimble by choice, and then to the refugees' variety as resilience. How long? She asked. Days, Ben said. Maybe hours. Hale's window chimed with a tally. The open forge accord passed by a margin slim enough to feel precious. The chamber erupted, some in relief, some in dread, most in the strange ache that change leaves behind. Meyer opened fleet-wide. Congratulations, she said wryly. We just promised to teach the galaxy how to build more ships. And now? Layla asked. Maya looked at the loom of hulls, at the alien choir, at the wounded maid guests. Now we teach them why we built them in the first place. She highlighted space beyond Mars where the lensing trembled like heat above asphalt. Threads, reweave for a combined defense. Open a lane for enforcers to slot in as equals. Processional, you wanted a representative. You're all conscripted. A childhood memory flickered. A classroom globe with the oceans all wrong. A teacher saying the map is not the territory. A kid thinking, sure, but a map gets you home if you read it together. Harbor doctrine, Maya said. Found family scale. Civic duty cadence. Coalition tempo. Ships began to move. The loom turned into a banner. At the far edge of human reach, something immense tasted the pattern and came on faster. Begin, Maya said. Image prompt. Bright, crisp sci-fi scene of a massive human fleet made of uniform, modular gray ships with yellow ribs forming a woven spiral net, around 12 elegant, curving alien cruisers. High Earth orbit glows blue and white below. Threads of reflective panels and foamed metal curtains shimmer between ships. A red chevron med skiff ferries refugees to a larger command vessel. Lighting vivid and clean, blues, reds, purples, yellows, whites. No borders, no text, cinematic wide angle. The warning came as a shiver through reality, not a blip on radar. Archivist Corin's pupils dilated until his irises were winter moons. Continuum signatures, he said on the shared relay, voice hushed as a library at midnight. Hemlock, it does not strike like a spear, it convinces like a hymn. Systems forget they have choices and become one thing only. Maya felt the old, useful fear that tightens thought instead of scattering it. We beat a song with a better band, she said. Coalition command, we're writing a score. Ambassador Hale's window flickered in from the Concorde ring, tie abandoned for a simple collar pin that said teacher more than envoy. We need counterpoint, he said, plural rhythms. Isaiah Berlin used to talk about hedgehogs and foxes, the one big thing versus the many small things. Hemlock is a hedgehog, let's be foxes. Admiral Sar Vetch bristled, mandate crest rising like iron filings. We don't fight with metaphors, human. We do, Hale answered. They scale. The processional's diplomatic voice cut in careful, curious. We record an antique practice called counter-harmonic beacons, used when an early chorus virus tried to legislate unanimity. Our builders tuned hulls to slightly different resonance. It degraded the spread. Maya flicked to the yard feed. Priya, can we introduce variants without breaking swappability? In the undersea cathedral of steel, Dr. Priya Naring pinched the bridge of her nose, then grinned like a mechanic who'd been handed a dare. We can bake wobble, she said. 5% asymmetry in radiator fin spacing. Micro off-axis in coil winding still with intolerance. We'll lose efficiency. Maybe 30% throughput if I'm being honest. What do we gain? Meyer asked. Diversity, Priya said simply. Potato fields learn the hard way, monocultures die pretty. The Irish famine wasn't a moral failure of farmers, it was a systems failure of sameness. We'll make your fleet ugly and resilient. Do it, Maya said. Paint it too, patterns, anything that breaks resonance. Ask anyone with hands. The order flowed like water into thirsty soil. Refugees in borrowed jumpsuits turned to with a will, tapping stripes onto hull panels with foam brushes, laying patchwork decals cut from medical tape and emergency blankets. A grandmother traced a spiral she remembered from a pot her mother had thrown. A kid smeared a handprint next to a service port, laughing when it came away silver from vacuum grease. An enforcer pilot, 6 fingers, gray skin, pride as neat as her hair braid, watched the chaos, then asked carefully, "May I help?" Her name, she finally offered, was Lyra. "Mask up and paint, Lyra," Omar Reyes said, handing her a cart. "Welcome to the Union." Mandate cutters formed their own precise spearhead and asked for a time-on-target plan with decimals. Maya nodded. "You'll be our metronome. We'll be the swing." Ben Yazzie rolled his shoulders, humming an old song his grandfather had taught him in a language the satellites didn't know. He opened the whisper band nets, invited allies in. Tagalog from a tug out of Manila, Yoruba from a skiff crew who cooked jollof on their reactor casing, Lakota from a resupply barge named after the rain. The processional offered a breathy trill that was mostly consonants and kindness. Layla had seated timing pulses on light beams so tight they could have threaded needles. Refugee labor, Admiral Vetch objected. Unacceptable exposure. Berlin airlift, Hale said. Civilians lifted bread and coal under threat because logistics is the opposite of despair. We'll not put them on guns. We will let them sew sails and set tables. Agency is armor. The first Hemlock Scout arrived like a shadow that believed it was a flame. Space around it flattened, variables preferring one value, autopilots blinked. On 3 human hulls, attitude controllers switched to a factory default, the same choice in 3 places, the beginning of a hymn. Manual now, Maya snapped. Cut to dumb iron. If your algorithm thinks it's clever, insult it. Switches thunked. Hands took what machines had been trained to keep. Threads held, shivering. The Scout pulsed. A mandate cutter drifted toward a lockstep that would have dragged it into a collision with a refugee barge. Lyra, still streaked with paint, still tethered to Tagiai's skiff for the uneasy dance of pride accepting help, fired a manual squib that kicked her craft across the gap. The tether sang. Tagiai grunted. The 2 small ships together made a brace that prevented a disaster by the thickness of a glove. "Thank you," the mandate pilot said, incredulous. Tagiai's laughter crackled. "You're heavy for a dancer. Don't step on my feet." At the grid's far edge, a thread faltered where Hemlock's persuasion found a seam not yet painted, not yet wobbled. 3 identical hulls agreed to face the same way and couldn't remember why that was wrong until impact. "Ships down," Layla whispered. "Alive, most of them. We can reach." Maya tasted ash. "Mark it, remember it, fix it." On Luna, the defense grid roused with a predator's patience. Hemlock Scout turned an ear toward the big guns and began to hum louder. "Commander," Ben said, "it's not aiming at us. It's aiming to make the moon believe it only has one job. And if a shield forgets it can also shelter," Maya said, "it becomes a wall that keeps everyone out." Hemlock's second pulse rolled in. The curtain trembled. The map sprouted a place where every vector pointed the same way. We need the core rail, Maya said. We need it now. The fleet began to sing, and Hemlock, hearing plurality as a dare, came on. The first full wave of Hemlock felt like a weather front of agreement. Procedures that treasured variety tried to negotiate with it and found themselves nodding politely. Maya spoke into the general net as if she could pin language to physics. Break cadence, all of you. No two ships turn the same. I want jazz, not drill. Copy, Ben said, and seeded the jazz keys. Staggered beat codes that told ships to act like drummers on a New Orleans corner, call and response, second lines weaving around the march. Mandate cutters flinched at the looseness, then adjusted with a stubborn discipline that found room even inside swing. The processional released counter-harmonic buoys, antennas wrapped in carved shells that scattered sameness into pretty, useless shards. Priya's variance started to matter. A thread that would have marched into a resonance cascade instead shivered, each hull refusing to hum exactly the note its neighbor did. Efficiency dropped. Humanity paid in heat and fuel and sweat. But the grid lived. Hemlock pushed again, turning the moon's defense lattice towards singular purpose. One by one, Luna's rails began to prioritize a single target class that wasn't there, the way a mind under coercion repeats a name to forget a face. Colonel Mitchell, patched into the net from a bunker older than the maps, cursed like a poet and tore again at the chorus clots infecting her protocols. "We are a shield and a harbor and a hand to hold," she muttered, a mantra that kept her remembering. In the Bay of Common Cause, Omar Reyes taped an enforcer pilot's cracked carapace and taught her to count breaths on 4 and 6, not just 5. Lyra translated for her stunned comrades when pride wouldn't let them admit confusion. "Humans insist on being messy on purpose," she said, almost fond. "It is tactical." Ben's board screamed. "Vector tier bearing sunward, continuum wedge, it's going to scissor the threads." "Let it think it can," Maya said, "then give it something to cut that phrase." She called for banners, big reflective sails folded into every human hull because someone in procurement had a love affair with old sea stories. Refugees and machinists ran lines, hands slapping eyelets into clips with the joy of knots remembered from childhood kites. The sails snapped open and turned the wedge's clean line into a shimmering mirage. Hemlock tried to hold a single normal. The sails fed at 1,000. The wedge slowed, sulking. Then it found a seam anyway between a mandate spear and a human thread, right where doctrine met habit. It darted and space screamed. Common Cause jolted. Displays cascaded to black, then to emergency amber. Gravity hiccuped. 1,000 loose objects discovered they loved freedom. Maya's console died and came back as a ghost. The wedge had convinced the ship her most important vector was forward, so everything else ceased to exist for a heartbeat that could have been an ending. Layla's voice came in thin, as if she was speaking through a straw. "We've lost 3 reaction wheels and the starboard radiator. Casualties light for now." "Ben?" Meyer asked. His reply was calm because he was the kind of man who remembered to be calm for other people. Whisper bands intact, chorale still singing, but Hemlock just tapped Luna again. "Their rails are choosing single target priority, our banners." Priya broke in, breathless. "I have variance kits printed and packed. Micro-baffle plates, mistuned gyros, off-axis antenna mounts. I can put them on drones and throw them at you like confetti, but I need corridors." "You'll have them," Maya said, though her hands shook. "We make a Berlin airlift through a battle." Admiral Vetch snarled in disgust that wasn't quite at humanity anymore. You risk supply corridors under enemy persuasion. Operation Vittles, Hale said softly in his window from the ring, a history lesson thrown like a rope. 2 million people fed for a year by airplanes that refuse to agree with a blockade. We are not the first to throw flour at a wall. The processional chimed, combining ceremony with grit. We will escort the drones. Our singers will braid your corridors. A new set of lights flared at the edge of scope, asteroid belt launch signatures. Maya's mouth went dry. Who authorized Sledgehammer? Colonel Mitchell answered. I did, she said, and guilt did not touch her voice. Hemlock's core will only notice force when it's channeled into a null. We need timed kinetic to the nodes your sails reveal. We can hit pebbles into whales. Collateral, Meyer asked. Proportional, Mitchell said. If we miss by more than a whisker, I retire myself and you can have my bunker. The first sledgehammer rod streaked through the sky like punctuation in a long sentence that needed a full stop. Hemlock shivered where it pretended to be seamless and showed a seam. Again, Maya said. Common Cause rolled into a blackout, hull groaning. For a breath, every voice on the net went quiet. And in the quiet, Hemlock grew louder. The world came back in a bouquet of alarms. Ben Yazzi's hands moved before his eyes had entirely returned. He shut down the one system that wanted to cascade and fed power to the one that would refuse obedience if you asked nicely. Layla tore her headset off and rewired the panel with a pocket knife, because training manuals rarely include when physics tries to become a cult. Status, Meyer asked, knowing there would be gaps. 2 thread clusters cut, Layla said. We're patching holes with sail shadow and stubbornness. Casualties, 6 critical, dozens with bruises and stories. Lyra's back in the cockpit. Tajii lost a glove in a scrape and swore for 5 straight minutes in 3 languages without repeating herself. The console spat sparks like an angry holiday. Maya smiled grimly. Good. Make sure the children in the viewing port heard every syllable. Vocabulary is part of defense. In the Concorde ring, Hale faced down a chamber that had seen too many speeches and too few kitchens. We need emergency legitimacy, he said. Tri-party was a moment. We need rule of law that lives past this hour. He called it the coalition tempo. A doctrine where enforcers, processional and harbor command shared timing, not hierarchy, measuring beats in lives saved, not hulls preserved. High Counselor the Zara listened with eyes that had watched empires forget the difference. Archivist Corin sent a file older than most borders. Ice weirs, he said. When rivers used to freeze, we cut holes to channel fish. The continuum is water that wants to be a sheet. We must tempt it into lanes. Give me coordinates, Colonel Mitchell said. We'll seed the sky with holes. Priya's drones rode escorts like ducklings behind swans. They released variance kits in bursts of kitchen foil glitter. Human hulls bolted on baffles that made them less lovely and more alive. A tech from Lagos taped a mistuned antenna into place and kissed it for luck. A refugee kid from the barges drew a crooked heart on a panel and told the ship shyly, "Don't be the same." Hemlock didn't rage. It insisted. It pressed the voice of a single instruction into circuits that works better with choices. Common Cause flinched. Maya squeezed the arm of her chair and remembered stoic lessons a half-forgotten teacher had left in her backpack. It isn't what happens. It's how you choose to meet it. Hold, she told herself. Choose. Sledgehammer rods fell in a cadence that would have made a drummer nod. 1, 2, 3 rest. 1, 2 rest rest. Slots punched through the wedge where banners showed nulls. Missed shots cracked into empty shadow and wrote lines of glowing regret across nowhere. One rod shattered a derelict satellite. A veil of glitter drifted like a small galaxy that never found a name. Collateral within bounds, Mitchell reported, voice tight. Keep me honest. Lyra's enforcer cutter rolled into a parallel with Tajiai's skiff, tether new and neat between them. We are taught to be exact, Lyra said on open band, almost like sharing a recipe. We have few words for almost. Today I need the almost. You'll love jazz, Tajiai said. They led a dozen small ships into a weir maze Corin had drawn in an hour on the back of an ancient protocol. Hemlock flowed into lanes where it could be seen and therefore struck. Mandate spears stabbed into those lanes with an efficiency that for once had a place inside chaos. The processional sang progress markers. The human grid adjusted like a neighborhood changing routes when a parade claims the avenue. On the moon, Mitchell's people, miners turned gunners turned traffic cops, reprogrammed rails to journal their choices like ship's logs. We are not one thing. The rails wrote to themselves, then fired anyway. The chorus remnant hissed and receded where it met that stubborn sentence over and over. Hale carried the coalition tempo to vote. Vetch shocked himself by speaking for it. I despise their methods, he said of the humans, but I cannot argue with lives saved. The accord passed, and something in the room that had been a dam for centuries remembered how to be a river. Hemlock felt it. It surged to drown the music. All across the net, communications tried to agree. The whisper band languages blurred into one careful dialect that would have been beautiful if born from love instead of pressure. Ben, Maya said, voice thin. We're losing vowels. He closed his eyes, heard his grandfather's stories, and made a decision with unsteady grace. He opened channels to every transmitter he could persuade. Museum radios, weather buoys, the last cassette deck on a Martian survey rover, and poured in noise that carried structure without obedience. Powwow drums from Shiprock, a brass band second lining through Treem, a choir in Detroit on a winter Sunday, whale song from a sanctuary off Maui, cricket commentary from Kolkata with a commentator laughing until he cried. If Hemlock wanted a hymn, he would give it an anthology. Priya watched her throughput graphs dip another 10% as variants proliferated. We can't build as fast, she told Maya. We can live faster, Meyer answered. I'll take it. The next continuum swell tried to lock Luna again. It found rails that whispered, we are also a hospital. It found solar farms that hummed, we are also gardens. It found humans singing into empty spaces with so much particularity that sameness had nowhere to sit. Then Ben saw the worst, a hemlock node forming in the path of a new refugee train. We can break it, Colonel Mitchell said, but the only clean shot is a rod through the corridor. The window is seconds wide. Hale's face appeared pale, steady. Proportionality, he said like a prayer. Maya stared at the board, at the dots that were families, at the rod icons blinking ready, at the hemlock node coalescing like a lie being told too many times. We open a lane, she said. We do it with a song and a sail. Tajiai whispered, tell me when to cut. On my mark, Maya said, and she raised her hand. Mark. The word flicked like a pebble into a lake and sent circles out to ships and hands and hearts. Tajiai fired cutting charges into her own tether one beat after Lyra did, severing the perfect connection they'd grown fond of to make room for survival. Their little craft became commas instead of an equals sign, punctuation that let a sentence breathe. Banners snapped in sequence down the corridor, reflective skin turning light into lanes. Refugee barges, patched and panting, slid through a tunnel that existed because 1,000 ships agreed to disagree in careful ways. Ben layered signals over the opening, a braid of drum and brass and lullaby and laughter, noise with duty stitched to it. Hemlock leaned, listening for a single note to own. It found a choir. Now, Maya said into the lunar channel. Sledgehammer fell. The rod lanced the null the sails had made, an absence briefly denser than anything around it. Hemlock's nodes shattered in silence that felt wet and relieved, like air after rain. The rod carried on into nowhere. The corridor held. On common cause, gravity remembered its job. Layla wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand and looked angry until she realized she was allowed to be relieved. Omar Reyes pressed a hand to a rib that had opinions and kept working. In Bay 3, a child who had learned to say air in 3 languages snugged his blanket and pointed at the window as the stars seemed to breathe. Status? Meyer asked, afraid of the answer and loving the asking anyway. Alive, Layla said, then laughed, surprised by her own word. A lot of it. Hemlock did not break all at once. It pulled like taffy, trying to reknit a sheet out of threads that refused dye. Corin's weirs kept tempting it into lanes. Vetch's spears kept stabbing those lanes. Processional singers kept threading timing markers across the combined fleet. Priya's kits kept arriving in drones piloted by volunteers whose knuckles were white but whose voices were bright with jokes. Baffle plates, one woman said, holding up a mistuned fin. The universe is a trombone. We're making it jazz. On Luna, Colonel Mitchell's people wrote a new page in a manual no one had admitted existed 2 days before. If your gun starts to think it's a law, one note read, remind it it's also a tool. Then remind yourself you are not the gun. The continuum discovered that the cost of sameness could be loneliness. Plurality pressed back, not with purity but with mess. Just war theory has a clause called reasonableness, somewhere in the curve of a banner and the slap of a rope, and the taste of a shouted code that no machine could own. Reasonableness became geometry. Hemlock recoiled. It didn't flee, it withdrew, tasting a map it had never had to read. It left splinters that would cut feet for years if not swept. It left a scar in the lunar exosphere like a ring where a ring had been, but it let go. Silence did not fall. Music did, thinner then thicker as people turned the volume down and realized they were humming. Hale leaned into the console and let himself sit. Coalition tempo stands, he said, voice rough. Open Forge continues under inspection and invitation. Anyone who wants to learn to make ships that refuse to be only one thing, our doors are open. Our ledgers too. Admiral Vetch looked like a man who had tasted a recipe alien to him and found it edible. Your doctrine is an insult to drill, he said to Maya. Drill is the bones, Meyer answered. We just learned to dance with them. Lyra found Tajii in the bay after the all-clear, their helmets off, their hair sweaty, their faces young in a way that made Maya wish for better worlds. You cut the tether, Lyra said. You did first, Tajii said, grin dangerous and kind. Next time we'll tie too. Priya sat on a crate and slept for 6 minutes with a wrench in her hand. When she woke, she wrote a memo that began, Production caps keep peace. Variance maintains dignity. Oversight invites trust. She sent it to the Concorde, then to the Yard, then taped a copy to a coffee urn where people would actually read it. Common Cause limped. So did a dozen others. The wall where names would go accrued its first neat lines. Maya stood in front of it with a pen that felt heavier than a rod from the belt and wrote them down with care, saying each name aloud because names deserve air. Children from the barges, no longer barges, just kids on a ship, pressed paper against a bulkhead and drew ships with yellow ribs and silly eyes. They drew banners and hands and a moon that smiled because it remembered more than one job. They drew a line of little dots and labeled it We. Weeks later, the Concorde voted to seed harbor stations along the trade lanes, wayhouses with sails and weirs and kitchens, staffed by whoever needed a family that week. The Open Forge catalog grew a page called Artisan Variants, where pattern makers from a dozen worlds explained how to carve resilience into a hull so it could be both tool and story. Before the first station opened, Maya took Common Cause one slow lap around Earth. The ocean rolled so convincingly blue it hurt. She keyed shipwide. "We missed your calls," she said to the planet that had birthed everything messy and good in her. "We were busy surviving. We're calling now." Ben Yazzie patched the channel into a frequency no one had used in 100 years, a maritime band older than their grandmother's recipes. Layla made sure the signal was clean. Omar made sure the people near the window had room. Tajai and Lyra argued about coffee and came to the only correct conclusion, which was both. Across the hemisphere, radios in fishing boats and semi-trucks and kitchens hummed. Somewhere, a child with a crystal set built from scavenged wire heard a voice say, clearly, "We are a harbor." Maya let herself believe it for a whole minute. Then she opened the duty roster and got back to work.